train rolls into the Alyth yard in Calgary, it enters one of the historically richest parts of the Canadian railway system. Alyth was named after Alyth village in Perthshire, Scotland, but that was not the yard's first name. Not far from the yard is the original junction of the Red Deer and McLeod subdivisions of the Calgary and Edmonton Railway. The C&E Railway began in Alberta in the late 1800s. It added to the service already provided by the Canadian Pacific Railroad. In 1910, the C&E Railway was amalgamated into the CPR. In 1911, the shop and yard facilities were built. The area was first called the Elbow Junction, after one of the rivers flowing through the city. It was then renamed the Maharg, which was simply Graham spelled backwards, the name of the railway superintendent stationed in Calgary at the time. Finally, it was called Alyth. The modern-day train rolling into Calgary receives very different treatment from the old locomotives that chugged into the shop in the early 20th century. One of the first things that happens is the train is videotaped by cameras along the route. CP Rail employees are then able to catalog each train as it rolls along, far more accurate and faster than checking them as they get into the yards. When the train arrives at the yards, it enters one of the receiving tracks. Before the train can be switched, each car must be checked for defects, the most common being excessive wear on the wheels. This impairs its running at high speeds. Let's take a look at the car shop now. This car not only needed new wheels on one of its trucks, maintenance crews also found its bolster was rotted out. The bolster is the pivot point at which the truck is mounted to the car's underbody. It must bear the full weight of the car and its load. This truck is one of the older styles. In newer models, changing the wheels is a more simplified procedure. This one was originally a plain end bearing. It's been modified now to use roller bearing wheels. The crew here has to take apart the side frames, a time-consuming task. Newer models can be replaced simply by hoisting the car and sliding in new wheels.
We're going to move this one too, though, Mark. Yeah.
Take a picture inside the drill box. You'll be able to see the gap.
These old wheels will be shipped to Montreal, where they will be returned and put back into service.
Oh, up a bit more. Oh, you got it. There you go. You get that?
Yeah, that's good.
Here they have to fall into place. They want
You get it?
up in the center.
Now that work on the truck has been completed, the crew focuses on cutting away the old bolster. The indoor shop still has the nickname One Spot. That dates back to the days when it was the only shop in the yard which could lift the cars for repairs.
I'll just touch the side thing here.
Sure.
Don't go very high.
Lift up the car a bit if you want to on both sides.
Okay.
Cars are shuttled in and out of the shop using a device called the Rabbit. Which uses a system of pulleys and cables powered by a large electric motor. The indoor shop only handles jobs that last less than 4 hours. Longer, more involved repairs are handled in the outdoor shop. Dangerous commodities and tanker cars are also worked on at that location. The diesel locomotives which have brought the train into the city are also checked out. Most of these are SD40-2s. The Aelith shop maintains 315 units, including 15 robot cars. Diesels are refueled and then driven through a giant washing machine. The huge road diesels go in for inspection about every 3 months. Let's follow one in. The Alyth shops underwent some major changes in the early 50s as the railroad switched over to diesel power. 4 long service bays were built where several diesel units could be parked end to end, while maintenance work was carried out. The number of service bays has since been increased to 10. Work at the shop includes fueling and sanding, lubrication oil and cooling system water analysis, datal inspection, various repairs as required, trip inspections, communications equipment checks, and upgrading and repairs to local control equipment at the electronic lab.
Move this up and see flow.
Right.
Now it's now at 5.
Next to the diesel shop is the roundhouse. At the rear of the roundhouse is the back shop. Here the traction motors are serviced.
I'm nervous.
This traction motor has just received new brushes. Jumper cables are attached to the traction motor so it can be bench run during lubrication. The grease is inserted complete with its plastic bag. When a locomotive needs its wheels trued, it comes here. This machine can true the wheels while they're still on the engine, saving hours of time that otherwise would be needed to remove and take apart the trucks. More than 300 people staff the shop on 3 daily shifts of 8 hours each, keeping Alyth's shop open round the clock. The shop usually handles more than 70 each day, although it has the capacity to do as many as 110 units in a single 24-hour period. Outside, the cars are waiting to be switched into different trains. At Alyth, this is done using a hump. A powerful low-speed locomotive picks up the entire train as it stands on the receiving track and pushes it slowly up the hill. At the crest of the hump, the yard foreman with his switch list uncouples cars as the train passes by at a steady speed. And now, gravity takes over. Until 1968, Alyth yards used hump riders, men who got on each cut of cars and worked the handbrakes to bring the cars to a safe coupling on the classification tracks below. In the past, the switches were thrown by men stationed at each classification track switch. They received signals from the yard foreman as to where the car was destined. In 1968, this manual system gave way to automation, and hump riders and switch tenders were replaced by computer-controlled machines. This has greatly improved the throughput, coupling speeds, flexibility, and utilization of classification tracks. There are 2 computer systems at Alyth, the inventory control, which is linked up with the central system in Toronto, and the process control, which handles actual operation of the hump. The process control system operates in real-time tracking and controlling of cars between the hump and the 48 classification tracks. As each train passes through the array of switches, the location of individual cars is determined by events and wheel detectors and track circuits. Bulkhead and wheel detectors are used to measure car length and rolling resistance as the car accelerates down the hump. A weigh-in-motion scale is located about midway between the hump crest and the main retarder. It weighs each car as it passes over, and the measurements are fed into the computer. The computer also receives information on distance to coupling, air temperature, wind direction, and velocity. It uses this data to determine how much braking is required by the retarders. There are 2 sets of retarders in a hump yard. The primary retarder does the initial braking on each car. The secondary retarders fine-tune the car's speed for precise coupling in the class yard. The retarders use compressed air. The braking action is actually steel rub rails pressing on the wheels as they pass over. The computer determines the amount of pressure applied. The retarders must be tested regularly to ensure reliability. At Alyth Yard, CP Rail uses 2 tank cars filled with cement for the testing. The primary retarder must be able to catch and hold these test cars. As the car leaves the switching area, the car record is passed back to the central inventory computer in Toronto. Ideally, all the cars will have rolled through the system over the hump and have been coupled at 4 miles per hour or less on the correct classification track. In reality, that system doesn't always work as smoothly as the railroad would like, and sometimes trimming is required. Trimming is flat switching to tidy up the errant cars.
Number 7, Norma 7.
As inventory collects in the classification yard, the pull-down supervisor will take over.
Yeah. Then you're not going to see Walt again? You miss him.
He is issued instructions on where each class group is to go, and will make up trains accordingly. Yard engines will shunt the cars from the class tracks to make up the trains. The pull-down yard gets its name because the yard engines literally pull down the cuts of cars from the class yard. As each cut of cars is pulled down, the switches are flipped to allow the yard engine to pick up the next cut. Often the train gets so long, the yard engine is actually pulling from outside the yard, sometimes as much as a mile, along a line that is parallel to the main line. Two trains can be built simultaneously at Alyth yards. Once a full train is made up, the yard engine will tug it over to the departure yard. Pulling a full freight train can be tough work for these yard locomotives. Remember, on the open track, the trains are hauled by 4 or 5 road diesels with as much as double the power of the yard engines. Here, a GP9 front truck gets some added traction by sanding. The majority of Jeeps used at Alyth have been specially modified by CP Rail at its Ogden shop. The noses of these first-generation diesels are chopped down for better visibility in the yards. If the work in the pull-down yard is hard on the engines, it's also grueling for the brakemen. They're kept hopping constantly, throwing switches, and as the engineer's eyes during switching maneuvers. In the pull-down yard, the switches are sprung so that the locomotive can run against the switch. This saves the brakeman from having to reset switches constantly. Not all of the cars will be sent on to destinations outside of Calgary. Some of the cars that come here are for various industries in this city. And there's a whole network of tracks throughout Calgary through which smaller engines haul commodities for industry. The EMD-SW series of locomotives are used for industrial switching. These units have short wheelbases. That's because the tracks they're running on have sharp curves and are full of steep hills. Some grades are as much as 6%. This engine needed a little extra traction from sanding to climb this hill, sending billows of fine dust backward. Cars are spotted, switched, and empties picked up, all in a day's work for the industrial engine crew. Competitor Canadian National Railroad doesn't have a yard facility in Calgary. Each day, the CN transfer arrives at Alyth, and its cars are humped and sorted by CP Rail. This is done through an agreement between the two railways. In other centers, such as Edmonton, where CN has a yard and CP doesn't, the courtesy is repaid. Once the sorting is done, the CN train returns to its own depot. The CN train that is sent to the Alyth yard has a unique caboose, specially designed for transfer service. Instead of the standard cupola on top, it has side-mounted bay windows and large windows at either end. That's so that it can be used as the head end of the transfer when the train heads back to the depot. It even has its own whistle. CN Rail is not the only visiting railroad at Alyth. Cars from all over North America find their way to Calgary to be humped, shunted, sorted, and repaired. The rail yard has many different faces to different people. Not all of the visitors to Alyth arrive on the rails. The yard is given a 5-star restaurant rating by local pigeons for its grain. Cabooses are quickly vanishing from American railroads, but in Canada, the debate over their future continues.
Yeah, just hang on for a minute. Give me a minute. Give me a minute and I'll get back to you. I want to talk to the other man. Yeah.
Yeah, maybe you can stop the whole thing. Line 30 there, and it looked like he was going to get it. I don't know if he's going to get it, even though now or not.
You want them both or one?
Both later.
Just pick up the West End one right now, 8 o'clock, Humpy.
Not like the
Yeah. Thank you.